Hey guys, welcome back to Cult of Film. At the top of today's episode, we just want to make a humble request. If you have been watching us, if you enjoy us, please hit that subscribe button. Please like, please comment. It would help us out tremendously with the algorithm, which is the almighty God of building podcasts and shows. We have actually made incredible strides. This channel has, over the past month, we're up 500% in views. So we are incredibly grateful. I thank you all. But do help us keep the momentum going. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Even if you don't like us, please hate watch and hate share and hate like. And yeah, we appreciate it. So today, Truman and I are going to get into talking about one of the most notorious horror films ever made. So much so that shortly after its release in 1981, it was immediately banned in most territories it was opening in. And it is Andrej Zulawski's Possession from 1981, starring Isabel and Sam Neill. Uh, my buddy Truman and I, we just sat down to it was his first time watching, and I think it was like my fourth time watching, and it had been a minute since I'd seen it. And so I guess since you're the freshest here, man, what did you think of Possession?
Yeah, I had a great time with this movie. It was, it's one of those movies that I have heard a lot about. You know, people talk and they say, "Oh, I just saw Possession, and it's this crazy, really out there kind of movie." And it really was. So I had it on my list for a while. So I'm glad that we actually had the chance to sit down and watch it. Um, and I was really impressed by it. There are a lot of movies that kind of attempt what Possession does, tonally speaking. Possession has these really, really big swings, and it's this very big and kind of melodramatic movie, and the performances are very out there. And usually I'm not crazy about a film that leans into the melodrama so much, but I like it because the melodrama is motivated. It says that it's this story about divorce. Essentially just one of the messiest divorces you could have a couple go through. And as you pointed out to me, I kind of realized it's like, oh, most of this is meant to be from the perspective of the child of the two people who are divorcing.
Whoa,
And
hang on a second. Hang on, not to interrupt you. That's
so
my thesis.
it's
I've not read, and I've read a ton of analyses of this movie. I've never read a single one that says that that's the point of view, that that's why things are so melodramatic and things are so weird and things are so scary. That was just I'm like, how do I make sense of some of the more surreal elements, some of the more
right,
surreal acting? And the only explanation I could come up with is, oh, this is what an 8-year-old boy would see as he watches and experiences his parents' marriage fall apart. Which,
right.
as a child of divorce myself, it's extremely scary. Your whole world is flipped on its head. So just to be clear, this was, and to defend myself, to my knowledge, this is my theory. I've not seen anyone interpret it that way, but I could be wrong. Sometimes you read stuff, you absorb, and you forget. But to my knowledge, I haven't seen that particular theory applied. But it's one of many that I'm putting out there. So sorry to interrupt.
Right. No, it's fine. And yeah, any as with anything like this movie, where it has a lot of surreal elements and it is a little more out there. There's going to be a lot of different interpretations, but personally, I really like yours, and I like the way everything. As soon as you said that, after we watched the film, everything kind of fell into place for me, and it was like, oh, that makes so much sense. That makes this and that kind of all suddenly feel very cohesive in a movie that's otherwise, again, like really all over the place because it goes in so many different directions.
Right.
But in a good way, because it does so many different things, and it really goes for what it does, and it just the execution on this film is really excellent. And so I had a really fantastic time with it. So I'm glad we watched it.
I'm glad you liked it. I mean, obviously you're a film guy. You know, I don't know how this movie would land with other friends of mine that aren't, you know, aren't in some part of industry, aren't cinephiles, aren't, you know, technicians, aren't writers, don't, you know, and you know, film isn't a culture for them, and I could see where some folks might have a problem with it. Uh,
Right.
and I'm not a huge fan of sort of arbitrary or deliberate surrealism necessarily. If I have a criticism of this movie, I would have grounded several of the moments in this movie where the actors' movements and behaviors become very strange, and I would have grounded that a bit more just to add weight to the scene, which I think some of them. I could see how it could take a civilian. It could take a civilian out of some of the scenes, but in defense of it, it does add to this very strange, almost possession-like um, aspect to it. I mean, the film is called Possession. You know, there's reveals in this movie that, and I want to try to not give too much away because this is a movie that's worth watching. I do think it's so visceral on so many levels. Isabel Lajani's performance is truly commendable. I believe she received a few honors. It was either at Cannes or Venice when this movie dropped. People were blown away by what she does. She had to have been exhausted by the end of the shoot.
Oh my God, yeah.
But the physicality of the actors, even the very strange physicality on the part of some, it does lend itself to, you know, when you just have to remind yourself of the title, Possession. You know, are all of these people at the mercy of being possessed? You know, are there spirits influencing this behavior? And obviously, there's moments as things sort of roll along that there's clearly a presence in this film that is really impressive when you see it. And that's another thing. At the time that this movie was going on, there were so many really great, like within a 2 year span of horror films around the early 80s, you had some incredible practical effects movies happening. You had An American Werewolf in London, you had The Thing, you had this film, Possession. It's interesting how there was this incredible dearth of practical effects horror films, and so many of them really hold up. I would say The Howling probably around the same time as well. So this is one of my favorite eras of horror films, just in terms of the pure craft and atmosphere. Early 80s, late 70s, early 80s horror films are some of the most atmospheric. And what like what I find interesting about Possession is like the color palette. It's so opposite of something like John Carpenter's Halloween. It's so opposite of John Carpenter's The Thing. There's a It's beige, taupe, gray, and blue are the prominent colors in this film. So when you get something that isn't any of those, it really pops. You've got scenes with Sam Neill's character as he's sort of getting really paranoid and weirded out about his wife's behavior and her, you know, not coming home. He talks on this orange phone calling her friends, and that orange phone really pops. You've got you know, when she sort of runs away to her apartment, you know, to be away from him. You know, the walls are yellow and the yellow pops. This movie is beautifully shot, despite the fact that it is a horror movie, and horror movies are meant to be, you know, garish and ugly in certain respects. Isabella Gianni's blue dress really pops. It pops, all of their eyes just all look like laser beams in this movie. So it's beautifully shot. But yeah, I think that it's to keep up front going into this movie that what this movie really is a film about divorce. It's about the dissolution of a marriage. But then Zulawski so brilliantly layers in this supernatural aspect when two people aren't listening to each other. They're being very self-absorbed in their own hurt as opposed to communicating and trying to hear the other one out. Demonic things happen. and that's really, really brilliant. I'm so shocked that no one has tried to redo this with the culture of remakes and reboots that we've been in for some time now. I've really been surprised that no one has tried to dust this one off, or at least apply the themes, the tones in a new film.
Right. And I would say, despite maybe not, maybe because of how controversial this film was initially received,
Sure.
um, you know, I you can definitely see influence on certain elements of modern horror. I would say
Oh,
in
right.
particular, Ari Aster's the obvious
Oh.
example, where in the films that he makes are more deliberately, they're about relationships. If
Hmm.
you look at Hereditary is about the relationship parents have with their mother, or with their, yeah, sorry, mothers have with their children. And Midsummer is about the relationships that boyfriends and girlfriends in different communities have, and Beau is Afraid is also, about mothers and their children. But those are films which are labeled as horror films, as the genre, but they have a lot of, they're not necessarily straight up horror films, and they are very explicitly about these kind of bigger themes, in terms of the narrative, and the sort of bigger ideas that the film deals with. And possession is absolutely that as well. And I think that's what some of my favorite horror films do. Is
Hmm.
they will ultimately be about these deeper kind of character dynamics or bigger ideas and whatnot. And like as with any good movie, you want to see sort of broader ideas behind it. But I think possession especially nails it, and it dances a very, very fine line, because you mentioned The Thing and American Werewolf in London, and it a lot of the times movies that have these kind of great practical special effects, particularly of this era, focus primarily on the effects, and that's totally fine.
Hmm.
Love those movies as well, but I think the success of Possession is that it does both the drama
Hmm.
and the kind of crazy and sometimes a little bit silly effects and action, really, really well. And
Well,
I
the
think
the horror, the beauty. You're absolutely right. The it's when I mentioned The Thing, I only mentioned because both The Thing, Possession, and American Werewolf all have incredible practical effects. That's
oh
not
yeah,
to say
it's one of
they're
my favorite movies. I love
or
it.
like presentationally the same. And you're absolutely right. With Possession, the horror is truly in the treatment of how this husband and wife treat each other, how they treat their child. The horror is in the inhumanity, the callousness, and the self-absorption,
Mhm.
that the irrationality with which they treat their situation, as opposed to the effects or the actual physical horror. It's the psychological. This is, I would say this is probably in so many ways, and you I think you really nailed it with Hereditary. This is a spiritual horror movie with regard to people's relationships to each other and how they treat it. That's where the horror is in this film. Like, for example, Hereditary, which is another one I keep revisiting because it's so brilliant. And I think Ari Aster is a great, probably a great companion piece. So, Possession and Hereditary would be a great double bill for a movie like this. With regard to Zulawski himself,
Mhm.
I don't have a whole lot of. I've only seen two films in his entire filmography, and they both happen to be his most notorious films. The first one, obviously, being Possession, which a filmmaker friend told me about years ago, and so I watched it years ago. And the second one, is a film called On the Silver Globe, which might in some ways be more notorious than Possession, in that it is probably one of the most visually extravagant science fiction films um, ever. Production started in 1977 in communist Poland. They got almost all of it done 1/5 of it was not completed because a communist bureaucrat in Poland just decided haphazardly that he saw some rushes and said that this film can serve no purpose, and so it was incomplete. There is a restored version of the incompleted film available on YouTube for those that want to watch it. And for the parts they did complete, really impressive. There is a bit of and I don't know if it's a Zulawski signature of characters going into deep, long, existential, philosophical monologues, which in
Right.
Polish can be really hard to track, and the translation,
Mm.
it's it's but still visually stunning. You look at On the Silver Globe, and you think to yourself, okay, this is where David Lynch got his ideas for how he did Dune. Like
Mm.
the parallels are incredible, but I don't want to get too much in the weeds here.
Yeah.
Zulawski, very distinctive style based on what I've seen so far, but this might not be indicative of him because Possession is horror. On the Silver Globe is science fiction, and he does seem to have a whole lot of very sort of relationshipy romance type dramas that are in his filmography that I just haven't touched yet. But I think if you are someone who likes like we do, if you like original, if you like different, um, if you like a film that you can't predict,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
would,
Definitely not predictable.
yeah, definitely not predictable. But I could also see where this might turn some people off with regard to some of the behaviors by the characters that just kind of seem haphazard or arbitrary. I would just say, remember, film about divorce. The movie is called Possession, so you might have more than one person maybe at the mercy of demonic forces. And I do think that my particular theory that what sort of pulls all of it together for me, at least in terms of making sense of this film, is this would make sense if the point of view was from a child, because you're literally watching your world come apart. You're seeing the two people that should be your guardians, your carers, your protectors, just completely uh, fall apart. And so some of those, again, odder elements might make more sense from that perspective. And I think that would maybe help the logic of the film.
Right. And I would say, yeah, I like a film that works in the way that this one does, where there are many different interpretations and angles you can take, but it mainly is allegorical, I think, from a narrative perspective, where I don't think we're meant to take everything that happens super literally. Um, but despite that, I think the story has a good emotional thrust to it, where despite the fact that sometimes what's happening is kind of confusing, the each individual scene has a really fantastic and clear emotional intensity. And the purpose that it serves and the place that it gets you emotionally is really great. And I think it shows, even though a lot of the times while watching it, the experience is very murky. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's a good demonstration of how ultimately the emotion of a scene and the emotion of a film as a whole is what really matters, because you can kind of stick through a confusing narrative. um, Not that this is super confusing, but you can stick through these things if the scenes are emotionally affecting, and these absolutely are. They're very, very intense,
So much
and
of this
really terrific.
carried purely by the actor's ability and talent. Not to take away from Zulawski, who clearly knew what he was doing when he cast this couple, which is so interesting. He's a Polish director from the Eastern Bloc doing a film in East or West Berlin, right next to the wall. He casts, a French and New Zealand actor. It's just the power of this film comes through its performances. Again, it's a spiritual horror film. 90% of it isn't uh, the practical effects, and in so many ways, that's where it strikes you. And yeah, you couldn't, this is not a film that would fit with. I mean, it's shocking, it's compelling, and I think that's what it is. For as strange as it can be at moments, it's still super compelling. And I watched this movie with people who do like traditional like 80s slashers, traditional 80s horrors where you don't have a ton of character development and all of that. People are getting knocked off, even if it's visually atmospherically appealing. They watch something like this that so far people have enjoyed it more than they thought they would, despite the surreal aspects of it. And I think that's a testament to Zulawski and certainly to Neill and Ajani, just the physical stamina of some of these scenes is commendable.
Yeah,
Hey,
and yeah, it really is worth repeating.
Sorry, my fucking dog is behind the door, and I've got to now open the door to get her in here because she won't stop growling. So we need to cut for a second. Sorry, guys. God damn it. Fuck. Jesus fucking Christ. Come on. Come. Sorry about that, guys. Goddamn lawnmower running outside my door. Okay.
Let's get back into it from
yeah. So yes, we're just talking about the acting. So 3, 2, 1. Yeah. So again, it's none of this works, I think, in Possession if you don't have these heavy hitter, power lifter actors of Ajani and Neill. It's really hard for me to think of one who else on the scene at that time probably would have taken these movies. It's just so much of it is just so odd, and so the anachronisms regarding just where it's filmed, who was cast, uh, the director, and I think that's really what makes it such a gem.
Yeah, I was not expecting. Yeah, because when I saw, I did a little research on the film before we watched it. I was like, oh, it's a Polish film made in Germany and set in Germany, and I was like, oh, okay. So I kind of prepared myself for it. And then when I was not expecting for them to speak English, when they started speaking English, I had to like look for a second and go like, wait, is this dubbed? Why are we watching a dub? And
right. That's something we should have, I guess, at the top for people who aren't familiar. This is an English language film again, directed by a Pole in Germany with a French lead actress and obviously a New Zealander lead male who obviously speaks English. But yeah, you don't expect it, and everybody speaks English in this movie, despite the fact that it's clearly West Berlin.
Yeah, and that's I think it does contribute a little bit to the surreal atmosphere, in the sense that it doesn't really, the world that it has and presents us with doesn't like really make sense. And I think that's okay, because it kind of it has that sort of shifted, sort of weird sense of reality. Like within the story, Sam Neill, this New Zealand guy who we never see speaking German once, is supposed to be a spy for West Germany.
Well,
I think he's going over the wall.
A spy for, just to be clear, he's clearly clandestine, but it's not clear. I don't think he's on the communist side, but it's not clear necessarily. But it does. I feel like that kind of justifies why you have an English speaker where he's at with a French wife. It kind of makes sense that if you're an international spy, you might have a French wife and so forth. Sorry, I interrupted. But
yeah, no, that's fine. And I could see. Yeah, I agree in the sense that it's like, it can be rationalized, but I think it felt a little odd to me while watching, to go like, oh, this like foreigner is employed by the spy agency to like spy on Germans. That was, I don't know, kind of. But again, I liked it. I think it works.
he is. I mean, there so much of the film takes place right at the Berlin Wall.
Hmm.
So there's you could extrapolate a whole lot of reasons as to why he's there. Maybe he's posing as a foreign businessman in West Berlin to gather intel, and that's why he's where he is. But at the same, they're kind of at the DMZ point there, where there are several frames of the film where they're looking over the wall into East Germany, and you see soldiers there. I mean, not that that really has any bearing on anything. I mean, it's for guys like you and I to speculate and talk about, because we love this stuff, about okay, what might have been the reason or the logic behind that. But
Yeah.
just in terms of my mind, it doesn't it's not too strange, just because okay, clandestine, again, you can recruit spies from anywhere, and it would make sense that a guy who um, and I don't find Sam Neill's, again, I've watched there's another, actually, a New Zealand film that I'd never heard of, that you and you've got to watch. We have to review, because I just saw it. And I can't believe I've never heard of it. But I know the Kiwi accent, and I'm not hearing it from Sam Neill in
Yeah.
this film. A lot of people don't, like, for years I thought Sam Neill was English, and I know for a time he was a contender to become the next James Bond after Roger Moore. There's a James Bond screen test uh, with Sam Neill on YouTube. It's really fun to watch, because you look at it, you think, yeah, that would work. But
Really
yeah,
cool.
he strikes me as English, which makes sense. So he could be MI6, he could be whatever. But I don't think it necessarily detracts from the film. It gives you a reason as to why he might be there, and that's that. But I do like the anachronistic aspect of it, that you have these people who aren't German in Germany. The locations, I think, are fun. Like, this is one of my dreams in terms of filmmaking, is to be able to do a film uh, in Berlin, somewhere in Italy, somewhere in Europe, or other locations that don't necessarily involve people from there. And I like that. I like anachronistic designs of film and setting and play and character. But anyways, please, I interrupted you.
Yeah. No, and I agree. I think it particularly lends itself to the tone that this film is going for as well. It is a very intense and unsettling film. You're pretty uncomfortable throughout the whole thing for a number of reasons. It kind of hits you with a lot of different types of feeling uncomfortable, if that makes sense. And
Right.
I think, yeah, having characters that you know yeah, are just a little different than what you would expect. Throws you off. I think throws you off initially a little bit, and then the film kind of keeps you there throughout its duration.
No.
The other thing I like about Sam Neill being a spy is that it like comes back later in the movie, kind of unexpectedly,
Right.
where he starts doing like spy shit, and
Mhm.
it's this kind of weird moment where he's setting things on fire, and
Mhm.
he's staging deaths to look like
Yeah.
accidents and stuff, and it's like, oh, like, wait, he actually is kind of the badass. Like, this is
Right.
cool, and it's
Right.
another kind
Yeah.
of weird thing to bring in, but yeah.
He kind of gets, he kind of goes through the emotional meat grinder, as does she. And then, as it progresses, like you said, we sort of were reminded, oh, wait, we forgot what he does for a living. And it really makes sense, and it adds a layer to everything that's going on.
Right. And there are certain elements of the spy, because there's the A narrative of the two leads getting a divorce,
Mhm.
and there's kind of like this C plot that's going on that has to do like with Sam Neill and his organization, and this guy with pink socks that felt very confusing.
Mhm.
What do you make of the guy
And
with? pink
Stocks,
socks.
yeah.
It's this thing they throw in. Very
I've not spent a
offhand.
whole time analyzing, and maybe I should because yeah, it's mentioned at the it's we kind of see it at the beginning, and then or no, it's mentioned at the beginning, and then we see it at the end. I don't know if that's supposed to mean anything in particular. I could see Zulawski making it stand for something or not.
It's probably it's probably intentional. It's treated like such a big reveal at the end. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Where it's like we've passed the climax of the movie. Things are like
another
just
theory,
now winding down.
another that I have about the film, and I don't want to spoil anything, but
Yeah.
for those that haven't seen it, this would be your opportunity to exit at this point. But one of the theories that I have is I wonder if what happens at the end with those reveals and like literally when they're there at the end at the top of that stairway and we see something happen and we see this character come into view. I wonder if the organization had something to do with that. There's a part of me. This is where, like, if I were to remake this film, I would ground a lot of I'd ground a lot of these surreal, weird behaviors, and ground it in, and try to weave a bit more logic to it, and set it up as the organization having something to do with that reveal at the end. Because at the top of they're asking him to stay, and he doesn't really want to. He wants to spend time. He realizes that his marriage is strained. He has a young child, and he realizes he has to tend to that. And so that's a noble endeavor. And maybe
That's a divorce too.
talks at the end, and the seeing them at the end is a reminder that once you're CIA, once you're MI6, you never leave. Like, this is one of those things, as someone who's really, sort of interested in the history of clandestine operations, you never really leave the company. You never really retire. You're that forever. And that's a reminder of that. And again, that reveal that, let's call it a third force that emerges there at the very end. I wonder how much of that wasn't maybe somehow an orchestration. You could get into like conspiracy theory type stuff with that. So yeah, maybe there's something there that the bookends of his life are the pink socks worn by the G-men that he works for. That might be the logic of that. It's like, yeah, we know that because the fact that they show up at the end like they were at the beginning is almost kind of a bookend of like, I know that you said you were retiring, and we're like, okay, sure you are, but you never get to leave, kind of a thing, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I just realized too, we haven't talked about Heinrich at all. The best character in the whole movie.
We were talking themes and tones. Heinrich is a gem in this movie, isn't he?
Dude, he's fantastic. I love throwing in a character like Heinrich. Heinrich is this like gay ballerina guy who kicks Sam Neill's ass kung fu.
Yeah, he's sort of this. He's very flamboyant, and I think contemporarily in the West, the read on this guy would be, okay, this guy's an effeminate homosexual, but he's sleeping with Sam Neill's. He's Mark. His character's Mark. He's sleeping with Mark's wife, and kind of hands Mark his own ass when Sam goes to confront Heinrich for sleeping with his wife, because that's kind of, and again, this isn't a major spoiler. We know that she's not happy, and she ends up, spending time with this guy who isn't her husband. And then, Sam Neill's like, you know what? I'm going to go confront this guy, and it doesn't end well for Sam.
There has never been a man more cucked.
God, right, and this is where I feel like there's a bit of genius a bit of genius. There's a genius take on he could have the German actor who plays Heinrich. His name is Heinz Bennett. I'm saying Bennett, and I think he only passed away in 2011. He's an interesting dude. You could tell he's either a dancer, he does something physical. You could see like how he moves,
There's a
and
big physicality to it. Yeah.
yeah, incredible physicality to his character, which at first is like, what's going on? This is so odd. But I love the fact that you could perceive him as sort of a more effete male, um, but he also has, he's having an affair with this woman and beats the crap
Yeah.
out of Sam. So I love the anachronistic characterization of this guy, because it could have been very easy to just make him this German badass, hardcore guy who
Yeah.
just puts Sam Neill in his place. It's like, yeah, I'm betting your wife, and you can't do anything about it. And then on
Yeah.
top of that, Heinrich ends up almost kind of befriending, or he has a sympathy for Sam Neill's character,
Yeah.
and they talk, and they end up sort of meeting a couple of times, which also I liked a lot, because it could have been so by the numbers, it could have been so tropey, it could have been so two-dimensional, and that makes it again more interesting, and another reason I so much to love about this movie.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, you're kind of you're hitting the nail on the head here, in the sense that that type of character, he really does defy just all expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And he has the savviness to him as well. He doesn't do the typical horror movie
Right.
stuff. He doesn't go out like a buster, like some other people do. Some of the most just absolutely incompetent detectives I've ever seen.
Right. No, and that's again playing against the trope. Um, I really enjoy. There's a moment, I won't give it away. There's a moment involving Rick where you think it's going to go a particular way, and it turns out differently, and I just immediately it reminds me of all of Jordan Peele's films,
Mm.
where it's okay, we've all been here before, and we know as the audience, now is the time to run away, or now is the time to do the opposite of what movie logic would tell you to do.
Yeah.
And it's a treat to watch.
Yeah, and again, that subversion of expectations, that's something that people talk about a lot these days, and many movies will set out to subvert your expectations and and sort of play against your, like you said, play against type. But I think, yeah, doing it in even in relatively small ways, in this film, I think really helps to kind of keep you on your toes, and it contributes to the overall feeling of the unexpected that you get with this movie, and that's something that I really value in a film. Where you can watch it and you sort of had this realization of like, man, I really don't know where this is going. That's great.
Right.
I have no idea what's coming next, and that's a great feeling when a film can.
This is no, you're absolutely right, and this is one of the things that it's my sensibilities as a person aren't horror oriented. People, people meet me. It's like, well, you're way more laid back and cool than maybe I present. But I absolutely love horror, and I don't think people understand that I don't love horror necessarily for people getting hacked up or gore necessarily. It
Mm.
is because the horror genre itself is the most malleable. It's the depth and breadth of what qualifies as a horror movie is so vast that
Right.
you can get something like a Possession and a Hereditary, and then you can get Megan and Child's Play. You can get a Friday the 13th, but then you can also get um, Under the Skin. There's so many ways you can go with it, and I think that's what really makes a film like this so enjoyable. Is I don't care. You could pause this movie at any point and ask the people watching, what do you think's going to happen right now? And
Mm.
no one, right? No one would get it right. And
Yeah.
that's again the boldness of the originality of playing against uh, so many tropes. In addition to it just being beautifully shot and it just being such a visceral, again, spiritual horror film more so than, even though there is, some blood and there is some violence, it doesn't lean on that. It doesn't require it to be powerful.
Yeah, and there's really not like that. It's not that violent of a movie, you know? I
No.
mean, this is something that I find a lot of the times where I'll watch a movie that's maybe from the 80s or the 70s or the 60s or whatever, and it'll have this reputation to it, you know? I'll go in and it's like, this movie was so shocking. It was banned in 19 countries and
Right.
people were fainting and rioting at the premiere. And then you watch it and it's like, oh, okay, I saw this French film from the 60s a couple weeks ago called Eyes Without a Face. And it had a similar reputation where it was like, oh, this was very controversial at the time. People were appalled by it and all that stuff. And then I watched that and I thought, like, oh, it wasn't. I would see something like this just on YouTube,
Like, it's hard to, where we sit in modern times with the depth and breadth of incredible variety of films, and certainly the horror genre, what you can do with it, what you've done with it, and then you rewind the clock 40 years and the history of what were called video nasties in the UK and how all of these things were banned, and certain films like Possession, I don't think was available in any way unless you had like a reel of it or had somehow made a copy. Something like 20 plus years, maybe 30 years. I think The Beyond, Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, which is another one we should review, was another one of those where it had been edited, the score had been changed, so you didn't have access to the original film for something like 25 to 30 years. And then Quentin Tarantino comes in and writes a check and saves the day, and we get the original restored version. So yeah, it's hard to, I guess in a way you just have to imagine why these films were so controversial. But at the time, there wasn't the exposure to this type of content. I mean, you had three in the 70s, you had three TV networks, you had no social media, no internet. You get to even to the end of all of the 80s, okay, cable is bigger, the movie industry is bigger, and you have four networks now. So still there isn't a whole lot of exposure, and these things don't really start to pop off until the late 90s, early 2000s. So yeah, we really are in an embarrassment of riches right now in terms of the amount of film we can get exposed to and share. But yeah, Possession is 86% on Rotten Tomatoes. I think it should be a bit higher than that, but obviously that's an aggregate of who's reviewed it. But I'm really glad that you enjoyed it. I'm glad that you were game and open to watching it, because it's one of those movies that just lives in my head. There's so many ways to interpret and ways to think about it, and it's just a fun watch.
Yeah, it really is. Very, very intense. There's just a lot to enjoy, and I think, yeah, the intensity of the experience is, I think, the biggest takeaway. Like, it's really gripping as you watch it, and I think it's a great thing for a movie to be.
Yeah, if there's a film, there's a film that lives up to the claim like nothing you've ever seen. Possession is definitely it. It really is. And again, I think a parody with this would be stuff like, if you wanted to double bill this, Possession and Hereditary, maybe Possession and Midsommar are great. Ari Aster horror certainly pairs well with this. But it really is in kind of a league of its own. I mean, you could do Possession and The Exorcist. Again, the viscerality of both of those films, I think, would complement each other pretty well. But it is truly in a class of its own, for sure.
Yeah, I would say maybe as a double bill, maybe a little obvious, but like Possession and Marriage Story would, I think, be pretty good.
That's right. Yeah, you did mention that. Yeah, Marriage Story. That we mentioned that when we were watching. Yeah, it puts a different spin on something like Marriage Story if you watch Possession first, because you've got that sort of layer of iconic influence there.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this was a fun one. we'll tuck into, maybe try to tuck into more Zulawski as we go along, because he's got a really interesting filmography. But thank you all for watching. Thank you, Truman, for being up to this. And again, please like, subscribe, share, comment. If there's anything that you think that similar or in the vein of, in the neighborhood of Possession, or other films you'd like us to touch on, please feel free to share. We're open to recommendations. But thanks again for watching, and we will catch you guys next time.